You are tuned to Women and Water in Central Asia podcasts. Join us in our search and discovery of the water sector through the gender perspective, and meet the female water professionals from Central Asia and experts from around the world. Hear their first-hand stories, their opinions on complex water issues, their amazing achievements and ways of overcoming challenges. We are happy to receive your feedback and ideas about our podcasts. The podcasts are brought to you by OSCE's Women, Water Management and Conflict Prevention Phase 2 project, in partnership with the Central Asia Youth for Water, a regional network connecting youth and engaging them into the Central Asia's water management issues. Join us!
Good afternoon, dear friends. Thank you for being with us and for your interest in our podcast on women and water in Central Asia. Our topic for today is water diplomacy and cooperation, and I'm Mohammad Najim Nasimi, National Coordinator for Afghanistan of Central Asia Youth for Water and lecturer at Kabul Polytechnic University, and Jolpa Netakhanova, the Regional Coordinator of the Central Asia Youth for Water, as your host today. Water diplomacy is an emerging concept to the political nature of transboundary cooperation and to link water with broader regional cooperation, geopolitics, and foreign policy. Water diplomacy is not about negotiating on conflict issues. Rather, it helps establish relationships to rebuild trust between conflict-prone parties. The transformative role of women in conflict prevention and peace building has been repeatedly demonstrated.
And today, dear colleagues, to learn more about water diplomacy and women's participation in these processes, we invited Dr. Martina Klimes, Water and Peace Advisor at Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI, a well-known researcher on conflict management, negotiation, and third-party involvement. It is worth mentioning that SIWI puts such cross-cutting issues as gender equality, human rights, and youth empowerment at the core of its overall work. So Dr. Klimes has more than 15 years of experience working with dialogue facilitation, conflict resolution, political and security analysis, including practical work in the field and informal diplomacy processes. And she mainly focuses on water diplomacy, water cooperation, climate and security, and many other very important topics. So, Dr. Klimes, welcome to today's talk, and we are very happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you also for mentioning about SIWI's commitment to gender equality. I should say at the very beginning that many of you may know SIWI as the organizer of the World Water Week. And it's worth mentioning that the World Water Week was one of the first conferences that introduced something called gold standard. It means that conveners are motivated, strongly motivated, to ensure that there is a gender equality among speakers. For example, each session should have at least 40% of women speakers and one youth representative. So this just demonstrates that these issues are indeed very important to SIWI.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klimes. Indeed, not just interesting, but also very important. And for us as the representatives of Youth Water Network, it is especially very important to know about these things. Thank you. So, Martina, could you please tell us how you ended up in the water and peace, so the water diplomacy sphere, yes, and why not something different? Why not political or trade relations? And yeah, basically what made you grow and have a lot of achievements in this sector?
It's a very good question, thank you. I should say that I was just at the right place at the right time. And, I never planned to have a career in water. From early on, I studied political science and international relations. I became very interested in conflicts and later in the way how we can prevent conflicts. So I work more with traditional security, and there I gained quite also by a chance of luck, I gained quite unique experience in dialogue facilitation, in organizing meetings between countries who do not have formal diplomatic relations. That was quite a unique experience, and that just led on to other types of work and other types of research. And then I had this quite unique knowledge. And then at one point, SIWI was looking for someone who understands precisely these type of issues. So this way, I entered the water world. I have to say that I never planned to have a career in water. I can even admit that before starting at SIWI, I knew fairly little about the water world. But then I think that I came there at the right time. I came there when the issues of climate and security starting gaining more prominence. So I really had the right skill set and the right toolkit and the right knowledge to fit in this particular gap. So this is how I ended up in water. And then, of course, I really fell in love with the field. And one part of it is when you work with more traditional conflicts, you have sometimes very little to hold on because you talk about very difficult and sensitive issues, political grievances, security issues. But in the water world, I find out we can see numbers, we can really measure things. And that is something that's more difficult in the more traditional conflicts. So that's why I saw actually more opportunities. I saw more hopes. I saw new opportunities for dialogue facilitation in the context of water diplomacy. And that is really what made me become very passionate about the field.
Thank you, Martina. Indeed, this is powerful. And I would totally agree with you that, once you come into this water, yes, then it's really hard not to fall in love with it. And yeah, indeed, a very meaningful work you do. So thank you for it. So you focus on water diplomacy, dialogue facilitation in your work. So in your opinion, how important is it to have women and in various stages of what we call this negotiation process? And especially when, decisions are being made, yes, the crucial decisions. And probably you could share with some lessons from the world, and maybe if there are some lessons learned, like for Afghanistan, for Central Asia, yeah, that would be very interesting to learn from you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think it is essential to have women involved in all stages of the negotiation processes. One, because when we prepare for a negotiation process, we really need to take all perspectives into consideration. We have to understand the issue very well, and we also have to read the room very well. We really have to understand and listen to our counterparts. And women, they bring in different skills to the toolkit. It would be wrong to say that, for example, women are not fierce negotiators. That is really not true. Some of the most determined negotiators in the water context are actually women in different transboundary basins. But they sometimes read the room in a different way. They also build relations with other counterparts in a different way. They relate, for example, to other female negotiators in a different way. And this is enlarging the opportunity to understand the context better, understand people we negotiate with better, and also understand the issues better, because we cannot just afford to eliminate half of the population from these processes. So I would say that it is very essential to include this. It is essential for creating a conducive environment, for also the way how we think about framing issues. Negotiation is often about ability to see the problem in a different way. And for that, we do need many different people who, for the preparation stage, but also from the continuous analysis of the processes. So that is very important. And lastly, successful negotiation is also about follow-up, and it's about ensuring sustainability of the processes. It's about ensuring that the relationships we are building will be sustained. And here, again, we cannot afford to eliminate half of the population. We cannot afford to eliminate half of the experts. We cannot afford to eliminate the perspectives and capabilities that women bring. So very interesting is also to think about how we are building relations between women leaders. SIWI, for example, has a very interesting program, Women in Water Diplomacy, and I know that you're probably inviting my colleagues who work with this very interesting initiative. And that is precisely about that, about how can we focus on building relations between women leaders and supporting and empowering women leaders, and what it can mean for different processes. I would say that in general, we know that processes, not only in water, but also political processes that are not inclusive, they do not tend to be very successful. We could also, when we think about the region, just taking the example of the negotiation between the United States and Taliban movement, I think that this process, of course, would have benefited if it would have been more inclusive and also included more the perspectives of the diverse representatives of Afghanistan, for example, including women. So I think inclusivity is a key for process sustainability.
That is absolutely important, yes, and I mean, one can learn a lot in terms of how important, yes, it is to make this negotiation process is inclusive, yes. So that is to take really as wide and as deep as possible this views of various stakeholders and including women. So thank you very much for that. And indeed, negotiation is not something like that just comes as that, you know. I mean, it's really an art, yes. So you really have to put a lot of effort and really lead the process. So very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martina. If you can go deeply with this topic, can you tell what can you tell us about the different stage of dialogue facilitation and what can be done to ensure more equal gender representation in this process?
Thank you. So again, very good question. I think here we should think about process design. So when we are preparing for negotiation, and here I'm talking either if we are the negotiating party or if we are the third party facilitator, we think about what is the best process design. How do we design the process? Who should be in the room? Who is in the room? What are the issues we talk about? So it's important to remind us that the negotiation process actually does not start with the first meeting. It starts before. It starts with preparation. It starts with understanding the issue we negotiate about. And this is also essential when we negotiate about water. We have to know how much water do we have, how much water do we will have in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and how much water we will need. We need to understand the needs of our population. And we also need to understand the needs of the region. Very important to think about the needs of the whole transboundary basin. So here the preparatory stage is essential. And again, here we need very diverse perspectives. It is not only about focusing on the hydrological cycle, it is also focusing on the communities of the people who live in these basins, on their needs, on their food security, on their human security, on their employment security. So for this, absolutely essential to involve all different segments of the society. Further then we enter the negotiation stage. When we negotiate, negotiation is a lot about listening. And here we really do need to think about that. Which actors who have the good ability to listen? How can we really build relations with our counterparts? How can we read the room better? How can we really think about it? And this, when we're preparing, we also need to know what is our desired outcome. What do we want from the negotiation process? And also, what is our strategy should the negotiation process fail? And again, all this preparation really needs different diverse approaches, including women. Then during the negotiation process itself, also flexibility is very needed. We need to really think about this concept of losing face and being flexible. I think the concept of losing face, and I do not want to generalize, and I really do not want to say that this is mainly questions affecting men, but some evidence shows that it is easier for women to be a little bit more flexible. And again, this can also depend case by case, but this is something we do need to think about. And lastly, when thinking about processes, we need to think about sustainability and agreement implementation or process implementation. One very wise woman from Mindanao in southern Philippines, Irene Santiago, she said that peace is 10% agreement and 90% implementation. And this is very important to really think about the follow-up. to really implement what we agreed on, to really monitor the process, monitor sustainability of agreements, do maybe joint monitoring of the situation. And this is also really important. And again, engaging and ensuring that we have diverse perspective and having a fair and equal representation of women in these processes is very important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So it's very important, as I learned from you, that into different stages, we need to focus together on technical parts and also on different stakeholders in the states. And gender equality is very important. But if we go deeply with this topic, in your opinion, what is needed to trigger women participation in water dialogues and different water diplomacy initiatives and education in water topics?
I think that one mistake we should not make is to think that there are not women technical experts. I've been once in a meeting when it was full of women engineers, women hydrology experts, and then there was an actor who was actually giving a presentation on that we don't have enough women in these sectors, and the room was full of these women. So it's very important to also know that we do have ensure that the women engineers who study at universities, that they actually come into work, that they really do get opportunities to use their knowledge and be engaged in processes. And for that, what has worked, what we've seen, is to really work with male champions, to really have somebody who says that this is for the benefit of us all. This is not only about empowering women, this is also about empowering the whole society, and that is very important. This is not a win-lose game, it's a win-win solution. Engaging all segments of the society will help everyone. And I think we also need to broaden our understanding of what do we need really in water diplomacy. As we said, it's not only about understanding the technical water management, but it's also to think about governance and understanding the needs of our societies, the needs for resilient future, the need for just resilience. And that also, again, would benefit from diverse views. And lastly, when we think about education on water, it is again very important to remember that water is a multi-sectoral discipline. It is not only about technical solutions, it's very much about governance. It's very much about who we engage with. How do we ensure that no one is left behind? How do we ensure that we understand the needs of all segments of the society? We understand the needs of all farmers in all diverse environments. We understand the needs of different types of households. We understand the need of rural and urban areas. We understand what will be the needs 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and adapting the governance accordingly to what is needed and how do we need to also adapt to the changing environment. So when thinking and designing education on these issues, it is very important to stress that this is a multidisciplinary approach.
Thank you so much. It's very important to engage all the societies that are both men and women. But if we come up with in some other countries, maybe the gender is not really sensitive and they're not much participating in the dialogue facilitation. So whether can external actors help with the gender mainstreaming in dialogue facilitation and other processes?
I think that external actors can be helpful in, of course, ensuring that all projects that they finance, they think about both gender mainstreaming, but also gender transformative approach. That means that we really look into causes, the root causes of these inequalities. We don't only try to work with the symptoms, but we also look into the causes. And here it's very important that all this thinking is really done in a context-sensitive way. We really need to better understand the context. And here, very important is to work with local organizations. It's not really to bring in an external gender expert from a very different part of the world, but it is really to listen to the women who live in these countries. And that is really essential. It's to include them in project design, to have them lead project designs, to really give them the tools that they need for becoming really the leaders in their communities, and being very sensitive to what is the reality on the ground. So this is very important for the external actors. And of course that they can focus on empowerment of women and girls, but also essential, I would say the most essential is really to listen to the local women, to the local actors.
Very nice. Thank you so much. You pointed out very good things. So thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely support what my colleague Najim just said. Yes, it's interesting, but besides being interesting, it's really complex, you know. But it seems, I mean, it's unavoidable. Yes, to talk, let's say, simply, yes, or in a more primitive way when we talk about the water issues, because in the end, and especially when we are talking about this negotiation processes, there are a lot of things in here. Yeah, indeed. It's about this inclusivity. It's about this wider stakeholder engagement. Yes, it's the quality of the process, the context. So just from this one very rich discussion, I myself am learning so much, you know. And just, you know, today we have mentioned this word security quite a number of times. And I think there is a reason for that, yes, because basically security is the key tool for sustainable development. So taking this in mind, how does gender mainstreaming in water in the region, but also overall on the global level, contribute to advancing this security and actually peace?
Thank you. I do believe that gender mainstreaming and focusing on gender inequalities and also thinking about the root causes of these issues and thinking about this gender transformative approach is a very important part of conflict prevention. And this is how we also have to think about it. And of course, we can divide these questions based on a particular context. In some countries, it is really about when the countries are more prone to armed violence, it is very much about, for example, thinking about providing personal security to women leaders and really helping them to be the leaders that they are in a way that they can actually do their work. I've heard the ones from actually a former deputy minister in Afghanistan who said that for some people, having peace is just means, you know, being able to do what you want and living in a peaceful society. But for some women, it actually meant being able to go to work, being able to go to school. So I think that this really cannot be underestimated, this security, and really focusing on the personal security of women and the different leaders, because we've seen it in many different contexts and conflicts that it was actually the women leaders who've been targeted by different armed groups. And when we think about these causes of these inequalities, we have to think about the different structures of our societies, informal and formal structures, and that control practices at collective, individual, and institutional levels. And really thinking, how can we work with this when we work with either conflict prevention or when we then think about more peace building? How can we set the stage for for more resilient society? And I think that is important. We see that, of course, when there are violent outbreaks and when we think about peace and security, it is often women who are more affected, women who also contribute to the informal employment and the workforce, who are then really suffering in a different much more. And then we really have to think about the consequences of this.
You know, the deeper we go in this discussion, you know, and really looking at this issue of the role of women in this security and peace matters, then, I mean, more questions appear, yeah? So just like one final question on like women and security interlink, you know. So women are vital in to prevent radicalization within their communities, and overall this women's empowerment, gender equality, they are key, yeah, to preventing this increase in violent extremism, and that's basically, I mean, all across the world. So how does this relate once again to advancing water and human security?
I think here we should think that in many traditional communities, women actually play a very important role in dispute resolution, settling disputes on a community level, different local disputes and clan vendettas, different clan disputes. And we have evidence from countries like Somalia, but also from other different parts of South Asia, different parts of Central Asia, that actually in these type of communities, women play a very important role in dispute settlement. Women play a very important role in preventing radicalization, because they have all these different leadership roles, informal roles in local communities, when they are actually in many cases subsidizing lacking formal structures from the government. This was, for example, a case when the COVID outbreak first happened, that in many cases, and in, for example, we had wonderful cases, examples from a country like Yemen, when it was actually the women leaders and women on the community level who were the first responders, when there was just not formal structures in place. So this is really something very important to recognize. And then for external actors, it is also to say, how can we help these organizations? How can we help these women? How can we help local initiatives? And then in the case when women do play this very important role in the different dispute settlements, I think it's important we learn from them, because there is a lot of traditional knowledge. And I think that maybe it's not so well known that actually there are many cases of traditional dispute settlement when it is the woman who plays the role of a mediator or facilitator. So we need to understand this better and learn this better, and really maybe even spread awareness about these practices and recognize these important roles that women play.
Wow, definitely. I mean, this is so impressive, yes, and indeed, this is a topic to be discovered further. And yeah, thank you very much for this invaluable input. So, Martina, I feel that we could for hours continue, our topic, yes, on water diplomacy, because it's exciting and there is so much to learn from you. But to turn it a bit to another direction, let's say, yes, and to make it a bit more personal, because your story is inspiring. So how are you able to combine this brilliant and very active career with your personal life and with some of your other interests?
Yeah, thank you. It's an excellent question again. And I think that it is important to be honest and to say that getting into the field and to really dedicate the time to it, it does need time. So I can say that for a period of my life, I did prioritize work because I was very passionate about the work. And then this type of work that everyone should be aware of, career in water diplomacy, it does require a lot of traveling, especially if you are based in Europe. So this is something to think about, especially, of course, before the pandemic and before we started thinking more about climate concerns associated with international traveling and flying. So I think that that is really, everybody has to think then how to find the right balance, because of course frequent traveling can also affect the situation at home. But I think that finding the right balance, really knowing what you want and being very honest about it, and also finding understanding partner who understands that this is your passion, that this is something that sustains you, this is something that is important part of you. It's not just your work, but this is really who you are. I think that is helpful. And I think it's about also making your own rules. It's about really thinking what works for you and what is important, but also it is important having the balance, because it's not only work that really is the reason for living. It's not really, that's not the only thing. So important really to think about the balance.
Thank you. Definitely inspiring. And, as I mentioned it several times before, there is so much to learn from you. And definitely this personal tip is very important. Thank you on this.
Yes, Dr. Martina, we will come to final questions. We are a large youth network working in Afghanistan, Central Asia. So to have your message for us, we're also at the beginning of our career journey and a big, diverse and interesting water sector and water diplomacy. What could be your advice to us in advancing further as experts and practitioners?
I think my first advice would be to get a field experience, to really understand, and here I also, for example, mean spending some time in rural communities and really understanding the causes of these issues, so really talking to the people living in the most affected areas and really being able to understand why are these issues so important and connecting to the communities. I think that is very important. And I think for young people, regardless where they are, spending some time in the field and really dedicated time to spend to the local communities is really something that will really help them later, because it is more difficult to do this later in your life. So I would say that the first, spending time in the field. Second, it's working on your network, to really understanding connecting to people. And here I would say also not staying only in the water bubble. As I said, water is a very multidisciplinary field. So here I would really encourage, when you think about your network, also listen to people who work in related fields. For example, a big part is, of course, the whole climate change field. It's also about more the security, geopolitics. It is also about understanding better the different aspects of human security. It is also, agriculture is very important. And for example, understanding the different solutions for increasing efficiency in irrigation can be extremely important. And there is a very vibrant field in that. So when you think about your network, do not stay only in the strict water bubble. Think also about the related fields, because that can really help you find the right position for you. Like that's how it worked for me. I was expert in one field that was at that time was still gaining importance, or was just entering the water field at least like as we see it. So then I was able to use my skills from other fields in the context of water. So I would say really thinking about this wider network. And lastly, I would say listen to people. It is always very important to be to just ask many questions. I think sometimes people like talking about themselves, but the key is also just to ask the right questions and just connect to people and listen to people and hear their stories. Ask them, how did you get where you are? You know, what worked for you? What is an advice what advice you could give me? So this is something that I would really recommend, and just stay positive and really do what feels right.
Thank you, Dr. Martina, for your erudite speech. And today we learned a lot from you. And thank you. Thank you for being us for your time.
Thank you very much, Martina. And dear friends, so this was it for today. And we had a beautiful and very inspiring and enriching conversation about a super important topic of how to turn water into a source of peace, and the very important role actually of women in water diplomacy. And this podcast was part of our Women and Water in Central Asia podcast series, and new podcasts are upcoming. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much for inviting me.